So welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast. This is where we explore the new game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance, resourcefulness, and well-being in the workplace. Join us if you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business. Join us if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber. And join us if you want to be part of the new revolution in understanding how the mind works and recognize that we are more than just our psychology and that can lead to better results.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast. And today I'm lucky enough to have another guest on the show, Ankush Jain. And hopefully we're going to have an interesting chat about all things quality of mind and business. So welcome, Ankush.
Thank you for having me on the podcast, Piers.
Well, first of all, Ankush, can you tell listeners just a little bit about just give us a couple of minutes on your background, who you are and how come we're chatting?
Yeah, so I'm similar to you. I guess I'm a coach. I've been coaching for the past 7 years. Before that, I had a corporate job. I used to work in procurement for many years. And then I decided to have a career change 7 years ago, and just happened that the very first coach training I did also was a training that was heavily based on quality of mind and how the mind works. And so that kind of set my career off in a certain direction.
And it's great, actually, because you're someone who, came out of the corporate world and at the same time sort of came across coaching and this understanding that we call the principles behind quality of mind. So a lot of my other guests on the show, I've had to sort of, they've had maybe 10, 15 years coaching a different way, whereas you sort of coincided with that. And also, maybe because you're more tech savvy than some of us dinosaurs, you've been doing your own podcast show, one on relationships and one on business as well. So another great reason to have you talking to you today is just to share some of your experience of those people that you've interviewed about this understanding in business, and tell us a little bit about what you've been spotting and hearing insightfully about what they've been seeing about their work. So it'd be great to start actually with, given that you work with business people as part of your coaching practice and you've had the chance to interview some of these people for your own podcast show, what is it that you would say are some of the most interesting and fascinating and useful things that you hear that you think might be useful for our listeners?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing that really pops up for me is the fact that I've interviewed 20 or so different coaches or trainers or practitioners, and who all work from the same methodology or same modality as you and I. And what I really noticed was the applicability of this work or this understanding across such a wide range of issues or challenges or problems. And also around creation. So, I've interviewed someone with regards to how to deal with difficult people. And then I've interviewed yourself around leadership. And then I've interviewed someone else around stress. I've interviewed someone else around women in leadership and women in business. And the thing that they all had in common and how they work was this understanding of the mind. And you'd think at the beginning that might be too broad. How is it that all these different coaches and trainers are working in so many varied areas? And one of my interviewees, a gentleman called Dr. George Pransky, described it as the hidden variable in business, or the last. I can't remember what words he actually used, but it was kind of like the last variable, the undiscovered variable. We've discovered all these other variables in kind of leadership and business, and people are very aware of them. All sorts of things, from soft skills to hard skills. We're kind of the thousands upon thousands of books released, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books on Amazon about various areas, but there's very few on this one variable. And it just so happens that the this variable seems to make a really big difference. And you and I were talking about this before we recorded this show, how this understanding is not really marketed very well, if we're very honest.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very well known. If you go into the business section of any bookshops that are left now, the vast majority of books aren't talking about the principles behind our quality of mind. But the results that not only you and I get, but the people that we interview, who combined have got, decades of experience in businesses, the results are just remarkable. And that's what really drew me in. So when I did my very first training, I just thought, this sounds too good to be true. But then I started to apply what I was learning, not only in my fledgling coaching practice, but also in the corporate job, because I did both for a little while. And I just started finding I was more productive. I had, I was less stressed. I was not procrastinating as much. I was happier. You started having all these effects that I just couldn't ignore. That either is a huge coincidence, or all this stuff started changing. And so I notice the same with my clients and with other people who do this work, that really the reason why you and I are talking, and now there are podcasts being created, and there are more books being written on this topic, it is down to the results, as opposed to some kind of really effective marketing or some celebrity endorsement or being the latest fad. This is, I've been coaching for 7 years, but I'm probably quite new in comparison to some of the people I've been speaking to, and you've probably been speaking to, who've been coaching for decades. And the ones that were doing something else beforehand, like you say, have said this is far more effective than anything else they've done. And they've never gone back, to anything else, simply because of the results that they get.
I think that's so true. For me, I've been coaching 19 years, and about 9 of those from this understanding. So I had to give up 10 years of what I was doing, which is hard. And you'd only do that if the benefit was there. And it was, to me, it took a little while, but it became a no-brainer because of the scope, the pervasiveness, and the transformational nature of the benefit. So you wouldn't give up what you were doing unless that was the case. So I think you're absolutely right. It's also very interesting what you say there about this understanding not being very well marketed. And I think that there's a reason for that, but I'd love to get your view. And it's because it's quite hard to explain, right? You can explain the nature of the benefit, as you have done, and how wide that footprint is, but from resilience to leadership to agile change to relationships to innovation to creativity to confidence. You can explain the nature of the benefit. But when people go, well, what is it that you're doing differently to help that? It's quite hard to explain it, because it's one of those things you have to kind of see, and I mean see in the broader sense of the word, rather than just sort of understand. So I don't know whether that makes it harder to market. It looks like to me that makes it harder to market, because you can't just say in 1 or 2 sentences why it's so different. So I guess I'd be curious to know what you think, Ankush, on what makes this hard to market, and does it look like to you it's hard to explain why it's different?
Yeah, I think you, I, and probably all of our colleagues think about the best way to talk about this. It's probably something on our mind, because that's our business and what we do. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And one thing I find, because I don't want to make it esoteric or mysterious, because it's not, and it's about finding the right words. And the words I use at the moment, and these may change, are, for me, it's about finding misunderstandings. And the way I talk about it, it's like if business is an equation, and I don't know why I'm using a maths analogy. It wasn't my favorite subject at school, but maybe this appealed to some of the engineers out there. But, if we've got this big, long equation, to me, what we're doing is we're pointing out one of the variables in that equation that people haven't taken an account for. So maybe you got x plus y divided by z square root of, you've got all this big long equation, and we're like, oh, that thing, that z there that you think is a 1 is not a 1, it's a 3. It's kind of like that. That one small change completely changes the end result. And that's what we're trying to get across to people, that, and I do that through a lot of stories, because I find that people can relate to that. I relate to stories quite well. And I think that kind of helps to bring it to life, that this isn't some kind of mysterious thing that you need to, suddenly get, you have a moment to get it. But this is very logical. It's just that there's a variable that people haven't taken into account. So, one of the stories that I wrote a book this year, and in the book, one of the stories I write about is dealing with a difficult boss, and that seems to resonate with a lot of people in corporate. And what I wrote about was that, to me, it looked like at the time that my boss, his behavior was causing me to feel upset, demotivated. And if I talked to other people in my office, they would agree with me. They would say, well, that's not very good. It's not got a very good management style. He wasn't doing a lot of things that maybe a textbooks or business books would suggest managers do. And so it looked like it was kind of, well, that you got what you got. You had a bad manager, he had a bad management style, and therefore the end result was you were going to feel upset about that. There was nothing you could really do about it. And maybe some people could handle that better than others, but it kind of, that looked like pretty fixed. And what really helped me, because I was training at the time in understanding this stuff, was, well, what if the manager doesn't have any impact on how I felt? What if it looks like there's a correlation, but there's this variable that I've missed out? And the variable was, it was my own thinking about his behavior that caused me to feel upset. And it really didn't look like that. And I'm just very grateful I had a mentor who kind of stuck with me through that, because when I took that into account, it changed everything. Right? If he had the power to upset me, then I was going to be defensive. I was going to not look forward to work. I was always trying to challenge him back. And there was a lot of work involved. But actually, if he was going to do what he was going to do, and it had no ability to affect my feelings, then it gave me a bit of a gap, and I didn't need to take anything he did personally. And in fact, when I had that insight, I started to find his behavior funny. I got to the stage where I was like, I'm going to go and do some work. So one of the things that used to happen with my boss is he would tell me to do some work. I'd ask him for some guidance. He wouldn't give it to me. Right? I'd go and do the work, and he'd go, right, you've done it all wrong. And he'd want to change it. And to me, it would drive me crazy, because I would think, just tell me how you want to do it. This will save time. But then what happened was I realized, hold on a second, this guy thinks this is good management. He thinks that by making me go off and do the task in hand, I'm going to think for myself. And by him correcting it, he feels that's his job as a manager. Now, it might not make sense to me. I might think, well, I'll just learn it quicker if you just tell me how to do it, and I'll just do it. And it's more efficient. But that's just the way he thinks. And try and change someone's thinking, we all know that, it's nigh on impossible. So I stopped taking it so personally. It actually made my life a lot easier at work, because I would do the piece of work knowing he's going to really give it a good run through. And so I didn't spend so much time stressing out about getting a piece of work product absolutely right for this guy, because he was going to change it anyway. And so I was just able to get on with it, and in fact, when he wasn't so challenging, then it was kind of like a bonus. So now, if I hadn't taken into account this variable about the mind, well, and I hadn't for many months, I was trying to employ all these other strategies about, my boss's boss said, well, and my boss's boss knew he could be difficult. And my boss's boss said to me, well, you need to tell him that when he does this, it makes you feel that. Right? Because that's the way it looked like to him. And so I tried that. Well, guess how well that went? Right? Not very well at all. My boss thought I was just being overly sensitive. And the more that I pushed back on that, the more he pushed. And we just got into loggerheads. Another colleague of mine who was kind of at the same level as my boss said, well, why don't you try this other strategy? And it was all about dealing with personalities and try and do this. And that helped a little bit, but not really. It was only when I took into account this variable, the variable that actually his behavior and my feelings, there was something in the middle of that, which was my own thinking. When I took that variable of my thinking into account, I was so much better able to deal with him, which just wouldn't have been possible if that variable wasn't taken into account.
It's such an interesting example, because I think what you're pointing to there is the invisible nature of that variable. So sometimes we can see it, can't we? Let's say you two people watch a movie and one person doesn't like the movie and one person does. They would go, oh, that's just because I have thinking about those characters or those actors. We would get it. But so we'd see the variable of the mind there. But then when it comes to a boss or Brexit or a traffic jam or a low bank balance or whatever it is, we can normalize out that variable and it becomes invisible. And instead we attribute the feeling or the lack of resourcefulness to the thing. And I find it so fascinating, and I'm sure you do too, is to how invisible that variable looks to people. And, because what we're saying is it's 100% the case that it's mind creating our experience, so it's never not a variable. Just sometimes it looks like it's a legitimate one and sometimes it doesn't. And the innocent invisibleness of that variable. So I think that's something we're pointing to, isn't it? And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how you help people see the invisible nature of that, or your own experience of how invisible it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing I like to point people to is other people that they know, because it's often easier to see it in other people than in ourselves. So, if you look at a work situation, we probably all know colleagues who get wound up by someone or get overly anxious about a presentation or a piece of work or something that we think, God, they just don't need to take that so seriously. We can see it in other people. We can often see it in our partners or family members. So the first step for me is to help people see it in other people, because you've got a little bit of space, you've got a little bit of a gap there. And once you start seeing it in other people, you can open up to seeing, well, that's the same that's going on with us. It's the same thing. And even within us, like you said, it's hidden because there are areas where we do see it and there's areas where we don't. So, often I will, maybe this applies more to men perhaps, but I'll often speak to men and say, have you ever been so angry you want to punch someone? And they'll say, yes. And I'll say, I'm assuming most of the time that's happened, you've walked away. And they've gone, yeah. And I've said, because there's part of you that knows, I'm just not thinking clearly right now, right? I need to step away. And so whilst they may not articulate it as there's thinking going on there that's having them kind of see red, we intuitively know that there's something going on. If we didn't, we'd all end up in jail or in mental hospitals if we believed every single thought that we had. So I start pointing out to people, one, that it's going on with other people and they can see that easier. And then two, the areas of our lives where we might intuitively have an inkling about this, and then start to expand it out to say, well, what if in this one area where it doesn't look like it's a variable, like you talked about, whether it's Brexit or a recession or a difficult person you're working with, or a goal that you're trying to hit and you're going to struggle to hit. What if it's a variable across all of it? And the really cool thing for me, I've been saying recently to clients is, this isn't about being okay with not achieving your goals or being okay with less than desirable circumstances. If that was the only thing that was on offer here, that would be okay. It would be helpful to be okay, and be a little bit less stressed. But what's really powerful about what we're talking about is that it's kind of a double whammy. One, that when you are less stressed or less worried or whatever about, let's say, achieving a goal or dealing with a difficult person, well, and again, people intuitively know this, the more your mind is then settled, the better able you are to kind of achieve the goal or deal with a difficult person. Mm. So if I'm working with a business owner that's really struggling, and I point out this variable, they might go, well, I need to make money. And I say, absolutely, we're not taking that away. We're not saying it's okay for you to go broke. What we're saying is that when you recognize this variable and you get, less what we call outside in about it, less stressed about it by seeing this variable, what it does is it allows you to naturally tap into your own creativity and your own intelligence and all the resources that you've got as a business person to more effectively handle this situation around, your business becoming difficult or losing a customer or whatever, because we're all far more creative than we give ourselves credit for. And anyone listening to this can do a little thought experiment and just think, right, when I'm stressed and anxious, do I tend to perform better in general than when I'm calm? And I think most people will see that, it's the latter. And I've often reflected and thought about leaders that I really admire, and the leaders that I've really admired that I've worked for, when I had a corporate job, were the leaders that, there was one guy in particular, I remember it used to look like, oh my God, the crap's hit the fan, something's really gone awry, and everybody would be panicking, and he was a senior leader, and he would just be taking it in his stride. He wouldn't get caught out by it. Go, okay, look, this has happened, right? What's next? And his presence, and he wasn't aware of what we're talking about. He just intuitively understood something, but that calm presence enabled us to, oh yeah, okay, let's all settle down. Let's not get carried away. And we would always end up meeting or exceeding our goals under his leadership. And there was another, manager that I used to work for. He was the same. In fact, I used to think he was a little bit stupid. If I'm being very honest, I used to think, God, why are you not stressing out? Can't you see what's going on? And yet he would always land on his feet. And years later, I realized actually the great wisdom in that, of not panicking, and being more kind of taking things in their stride. And so it's not about, okay, we need to be born that way or have those kind of personalities. What I hopefully am trying to get across is that understanding this variable enables us all to have more presence and more groundedness and be more calm in those situations, which lead to more effective decision making, more effective leadership, better relationships. I mean, you name it, it has such a big impact.
I think you're absolutely right. This is not about tolerating or accepting less good circumstances, right? This is not about a way to cope. This is so much more, because as you were pointing to, that yes, we do feel a bit calmer and a bit more neutral about the thing. And we do have more resourcefulness in terms of what to do about it. But also the thing itself looks different. So what used to be a big problem that we needed some resourcefulness to solve actually doesn't even look like such a big problem anymore, because the world itself looks like it changes. So it's certainly not about putting your head in the sand or accepting or being okay with bad performance. It doesn't, it shifts it at a more fundamental level than that. And I just wanted to go back to something that we touched on at the beginning, which is the pervasive nature, the wide context of application for this, in all areas of work and life. And I suppose the question people might be asking themselves is, well, how can something that you guys are talking about, this variable or whatever, how can it be beneficial at one level to resilience and peace of mind and less of stress, and to creativity, and to increasing energy for goals, and even, Ankush, we know people that work in prisons on this, right? Or in mental health. So how can this one thing do all of that? Well, what is it? What's the nature of this that allows it to be that wide, the benefit footprint be that wide?
This is kind of the why, if you like, or the foundation of all of those soft skills. To me, this is kind of the next iteration of the work that started kind of 40 years ago, looking in business about soft skills, but it's been really hard to grasp, effectively, how can we develop soft skills with people? And to me, this underpins that and helps people then take more advantage of the harder stuff in business. So of course, this is going to have an impact everywhere, just like physical health does across more than just your health. It impacts your relationships, it impacts, business, and so many other things. So this is something that is more than a skill. This is a fundamental understanding. So again, the impact of it would be unusual. I'd put it the other way. It would be unusual if it didn't have an impact across so many different areas when you really consider it.
Well, and that's right. And that's because of the nature of it, right? So to me, when I came across this after 10 years of looking in the other direction, it explained why everything else worked and didn't work, right? So, and so it sits in my mind meta to all the other stuff we understand about the mind and psychology and soft skills. And it helps explain them because it sits before that. So, and that's why it has such a wide benefit footprint, because it is so what I call upstream or meta. It gets to the nub of the very heart of what is creating human experience in any moment, and what is pre-our psychology. So and therefore it has a cascading effect on any aspect of psychology, whether that happens to be, at work or at home, or as a boss or as a colleague or as a team player or whatever. So that's probably what's different about it, is it sits above all that. And in doing that, it can be a little bit ineffable, i.e. hard to explain. It can be a little intangible to start with in what it is, but the outcome is really tangible. I mean, you've given some examples and I've given more on this podcast and other episodes. So I think it's just getting people to be okay with and give themselves permission to press pause and to look up more upstream than where they normally look. Because this is an unconventional conversation to have, not the one you and I are having, but when we get into explaining our clients what the principles are, it's unconventional, and it shouldn't be. It should be a conversation that's introduced at school, in my mind. I don't know what your view is, but it seems to be that here we are in businesses having it. It should be happening much earlier on, because it's foundational.
Yeah, and I think that's starting to happen. So, like you mentioned, this is work that's happening in business, but in prisons, in schools, you name it now. There seems to be more and more people taking this understanding into just a whole variety of situations, simply because, exactly as we talked about, it has that effect, and the results are just so outstanding.
So if I'm just thinking, if people are listening going, yes, okay, obviously it's great. You guys are sold. You've drunk the Kool-Aid. What would you suggest someone is curious? I mean, where would you take it from there? Well, what would you suggest to people listening who are like, okay, well, what's next for me?
Well, so I would say to people, the best thing to do is to have a conversation with someone, because I think what's really helpful is to relate it to something that's going on live with you. That seems to bring it to life. We've talked fairly generally. I've brought in some examples, but really, if someone's struggling with X, like a difficult person or a goal they're trying to achieve, or a transformation they want to make in their business or in their team, well, having a conversation with you or I about that, if you're open to it, I know I'm very happy to talk to people about it. I think that will bring it to life, and I'm very happy to do that. After that, I think that's the number one thing to do. After that, there are some great resources out there. Your podcast is one. I've got a podcast on business, and there's some great books out there which I think are really effective for business people. Invisible Power by Ken Manning and Robin Charbit is a great book for clients of mine who work in corporates. And I've even given my book, which is not really aimed at corporates, but a lot of corporate people seem to enjoy it, which surprised me, to be honest. But that's one that's out there. Sweet Sharing by Ankush Jain, available from Amazon. That's my little plug. And then there's another book called Instant Motivation by Chantal Burns, which I also find is a really good book. So there are resources out there from free, which is listening to stuff like this, through to reading a book or having a conversation. So I would just encourage people to explore their curiosity and then see if it makes sense for them.
And I'll put all these details in the show notes for people. But I think you're absolutely right. I think for me, it's about getting curious, allowing yourself to be curious, taking it from what sounds like a bit vague to something tangible for you, so you can have an experience of how it shows up in your life, which is what you'll get from a conversation with someone who kind of can point you. And then to stay curious about, so how come? Well, what is that? Well, what happened for me in that? And I think it's just, it seems to me that in our busy lives, we've got a lot going on. And because this understanding, if you look at it or listen to it, doesn't always give you an immediate payback. It can do, actually. People then get a bit, what is it? I don't really know. And it gets into the, I'll do that when I've got time box. And actually, what you and I are suggesting is just be a bit more curious than you normally would be. Have an explore, because quite quickly it can get into that, I see the tangible benefit. If you just press pause long enough to have a look. So I think that's the challenge of getting something that looks a bit, what is it, into practical. That makes a difference. And then you'll start to join the dots and see how it is turning up in other areas. And that's a lovely process that clients go through when they start to see, the same thing, the same variable. There it is. It was hidden. Now it isn't. It was hidden. Now it isn't. So we're probably getting towards the end of time. Time flies when we're doing these, it feels to me. Any sort of last things you'd like to say, Ankush?
No, just thanks for having me on the show. I think you're creating a wonderful resource here for people. I hope it sparks people's curiosity. I think that's the only thing we can really do. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to reach out to yourself or to me. I think we're both very passionate about the impact of the work that we do, and the impact on people.
Well, a massive thank you from me to you for giving up your time to do this. And I know you're very generous with your podcast and things. So thank you for coming on. I put everything in the show notes for people that want to find out more, and stay curious. So till next time, see you later and have fun.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please reach out and leave us a review and a comment. If you want more info, check out makingchangework.co.uk or Piers Thurston on LinkedIn.